Faith Science Podcast. My name is Tyler Bublitz, and welcome back to the 16th Sunday after Pentecost for the week of September 8th, 2024, and I'm excited to have you here. I'm excited to dig in this week's podcast, and I am excited moving into this fall season. This is such a fun time of year. It's amazing to watch the reinvigoration of a lot of churches. It's fun to kind of see that new energy that comes as we have a lot of different things going on typically within the church, especially with school starting and you start having like rally Sundays and having things that are providing and bringing new energy into the church as we are moving into that fall season. Yes, it's quickly approaching. This whole idea and this change that happens, and yet we still have a couple months here before we have a change in the church year. So it's a great growth time, as I continue to reiterate. If it's green, it's a time for growth. And it's an amazing time to be able to look at, to think about, to consider a lot of these different things that are going on and being able to grow and nourish our own faith at that same time. And I think this kind of leads into the question that we had for last week, which was, where do we let nuances get in the way of uniting us? And I got a couple great responses this week. One, just being the aspect of who are we surrounding ourselves with? Are we allowing ourselves to be that loving neighbor that we're called to be? Are we putting ourselves around people who are not willing and able to be as loving? And I think that's an interesting question and a lot of internal struggle that we have to continue to fight through and recognize. But another loyal listener this week responded with talking about cataract surgery and being able to see the world in a new way. That this was something that was separating him from the creation that was around him. And I think that's an interesting way of looking at things, is I think there are times that we have sometimes physical ailments or mental ailments or different things that we can artificially or unintentionally or just happen to put up walls from uniting us. Walls that maybe are shifting our vantage point in some form or fashion that allows us to shift in our understanding of things. And I think that's an important nuance and something to be considering as we continue to grow and change over time, that there are growing and changing that we need to do within how we look at things and as we continue to grow and change. So let's just jump into it this week. One of the first readings this week is out of Proverbs chapter 22, verses 1 and 2, 8 and 9, and 22 through 23. This is a text talking about how the name that we carry and recognizing who we are and whose we are is so much more valuable than anything else this life can bring. Recognizing that us being able to claim and put on the name of a Christian, us being able to recognize and walk that out and realize what does that mean is much greater than anything else that we really can have. This is one of those proverbs that we are realizing and growing in the understanding of what it really means to be a follower and recognizing that that is going to be providing a sustaining thing for us. The psalm that goes with that is Psalm 125, all 5 verses of it. This is a text then of how we continue needing to trust the Lord, recognizing that the Lord is surrounding us, recognizing that the Lord is with us. And especially in this text, it's recognizing the world around the author in this moment, the mountains surrounding Jerusalem, the scepter of wickedness that shall not rest on the land allotted to the righteous, which we can assume in a lot of cases would be the promised land. Talks about Mount Zion, this recognition on how God is constantly around them and is wanting to be there to support them as long as we are willing to put our trust in the Lord. The other alternative Old Testament text this week is out of Isaiah chapter 35, verses 4 to 7a. This is a text this week that is going to be kind of alluring to the gospel text, especially verse 5. Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened and the ears of the deaf shall be opened. This idea of how the Lord is this provider of healing, this person who is going to make sure that we are taken care of and is willing and able to restore us, to be able to bring us into anew. and recognizing that in that, it's going to bring forth this wellspring of water, this wellspring within us, but also provide new life from that. The psalm that goes with that is Psalm 146, all 10 verses of this. And this is coming off of that, recognizing that our help is in the Lord, our hope is in the Lord, and this is something that worth giving praise to. That this is something that as the world turns and as things are going on, God still stays the same. God's still willing and able and is there alongside us to be able to help, encourage, and guide us, recognizing that God has made all these amazing things, the earth, heaven, sea, and all that is within them. So it's worth giving this praise and homage to, but also recognizing that God is doing all these amazing things for us. The epistle text or second reading this week is out of James chapter 2, verses 1 to 10, optionally 11 to 13, and 14 to 17. This is a text on how I think it summarizes it really well in verse 17. So faith by itself, if it has no works, is dead. This recognition on how if we have faith and are claiming faith and claiming that we know who Christ is, but yet do not put it into action, it means nothing. Speaking it in words without action means nothing. It's the action of what we are doing that separates us. It's not just something that is stated. It is not just something that is inscribed on our hearts. It is also from being inscribed on our hearts that this motivates and drives us to live in a different way. This is something then that helps guide us in who we are and whose we are, and it is a reflection of that. This reflection of the Father, this reflection on who God is to us through this type of text, through this recognition on how we then need to be that light out in the world, being able to live out our faith in a very real and tangible way. The gospel text this week is out of Mark chapter 7, verses 24 to 37. So here we have yet again Jesus jumping into two different healing stories we have this week. We have a woman coming to Jesus with a daughter with an unclean spirit, and then two, a man who cannot hear, who is deaf. And there is definitely some chatter that you could definitely have, or some time spent on verse like 28. Sir, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs, when Jesus is responding in verse 27, let the children be fed first, for it is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs. And it's this recognition, because this woman is not a Gentile, and as it's stated, is of Syrophoenician origin in verse 26. This recognition, though, how the desire goes beyond the chosen people of God, and because she is recognizing even the scraps, the crumbs, the things that are left behind, that this still makes a difference and is still wanting to have this connection that God has with all of God's people, still shows the desire that we should be having for God, and thus we can see that within this woman. We also then see, as he then continues on into the region of Tyre by way of Sidon, that now we have this man with a speech impediment and hasn't been able to hear. And so he is taken aside. Jesus puts his fingers in his ears and spat and touched his tongue and claims it to be open, and the person speaks plainly. He asks then for no one to hear this, but of course it goes and it is spread all around. This recognition on how Jesus then again is getting this one-on-one time. We see that in both the healing stories this week, one-on-one time, direct interaction with these people, and yet the healing still happens. This recognition of how Jesus takes the time to make sure that these people are healed. But before we jump into how faith and science come together this week, we have to do a shameless plug. Working Preacher. If you haven't checked out Working Preacher, I'd highly recommend it. Between their sermon brainwaves podcasts, their commentaries, their discussions. Since I'm not an ordained minister, I use them on a weekly basis to help give me some ideas, direction, different ways of thinking about the text. And there's some really great resources over there, such as the commentary. And even Working Preacher has a podcast on their own that does a great job at kind of going through these texts and thinking about them in a more theological mindset. So if you haven't checked out workingpreacher.org, I'd highly recommend it. I'd also highly recommend checking out the Revised Common Lectionary coming from Vanderbilt's Divinity Library. I really like how they lay out the text week to week, along with the art, prayers, hymns, colors, daily devotions. It's some great resources over there, great ways to continue to grow and inspire your own faith. And so I'd highly recommend checking that out and spending some time over there at Vanderbilt's Divinity Library. Finally, I'd also highly recommend checking out the Green Blades Preaching Roundtable and the Green Blades Rising publication. These newsletters, either on a weekly or monthly occurrence, give a wide variety of ecological echoes, implications, and urgencies to be able to use in your weekly preaching, along with some different ideas and things to be thinking about and contemplating, maybe along your own faith journey, or different ways to even think about your environmental impact just in general. So if you enjoy listening to this podcast for half an hour each week, I'd highly recommend checking out both these resources, the Green Blades Preaching Roundtable and the Green Blades Rising publication. Both of those will be linked down in the show notes. It is sometimes hard for us to deal with as many healing stories as we hear from Jesus. It just kind of, I don't know for you, but for me, kind of at times just kind of rolls over us, where here you go again. Jesus goes in and some miraculous thing happens and we have yet another healing in some form or fashion. But I think that's where the James text this week really helps us, is this recognition on how our faith cannot just be in concept. Our faith needs to be in action as well. This is something that means that it's actually tangible and living and breathing and is something that affects our day-to-day. It causes us to see where things are not going as well as they should be, and asking and moving in, if need be, to have God be able to stir and move within us to help in these different situations. Us being able to help in different ways. Here we have two different people seeking help. One on behalf of a daughter who is possessed by a demon, and Jesus still being able to push back a little bit, but yet is still granted and given the opportunity for this girl to be healed. We also have a man with a speech impediment and being deaf. And again, the desire that people had, the group of friends bringing him to Jesus, the desire that is there for him to spend time with him, to help him in some form or fashion. And yet Jesus still then takes him aside to be able to do this. I would look at both of these healings as stuff that doesn't seem typical, doesn't seem easy, doesn't seem normal on even the typical types of healing stories that we get from Jesus. These are very private. These are very individualistic. These are maybe more difficult? I don't know. There is something about that where there's an intimacy that is suddenly being shown in these healing stories. And I think sometimes when we are looking at healing and thinking about healing as not necessarily curing, as we've talked about before, but thinking about it as seeing wrongs within the world and seeing if there's ways that we can participate with that, I think is a perfect example this year, is going through the journey of the Northern Bald Ibis. Now, the Northern Bald Ibis is a bird that is more native to the northern parts of Africa and to the Middle East and traditionally Europe. And I say traditionally Europe because basically for the last 300 plus years, 300, 400 years, they haven't really been in Europe. We've basically had a very stationary population in Morocco with a little bit in the Middle East region, but very, very small numbers, to the point where it is actually a quite endangered species of bird. And like many ibis, it's known for their kind of long, distinctive curved bill, to be able to look and catch sediment out of water bodies, but they're also known for going into and being a bit of an omnivore, eating occasional bugs and insects along with grasses, along with even if they found something dead, like a small animal or something, and eating that. They are quite open to eating various different things. I wouldn't say this is the most beautiful bird on the face of the planet. It's mostly a black bird with some kind of iridescent wings as the light catches them, and a bald head very similar to like what we assume with a vulture. So thus the diet doesn't necessarily match up with the bald head that it has. This has also been a bird that within the Muslim faith tradition has been very important for potentially showing the way for the people to be able to do their different trips to Mecca with its migratory routes. And that brings up a great and amazing thing to be thinking about. These birds used to migrate. And the key word is used to. The populations that we have really established that are truly wild populations have kind of settled into these different regions and really don't move that much. So the migratory routes have been lost to history until recently. Because we have a solid population of these birds, even though it's not necessarily in the wild where we're talking at most a couple thousand birds, more likely somewhere around the ballpark of 500 pairs maybe, we are being able to take some of these captive populations and trying to imprint on these young chicks to have a foster parent, thus being an adult human being, to be able to help kind of teach these birds how to be ibises, and part of that being bringing back the traditional migratory routes from northern Europe into the southern parts of Europe, even across the ocean if need be. And even as part of this, and this has been something that's been worked on for the last 20 years with varying success. Initially, with reintroducing these birds back into Europe, one of the issues that you ran into is these birds had the urge and knew that they needed to migrate. They could tell that the time had come, they just didn't know which direction to go, and this led to a lot of early casualties of these birds. Now, one of the things that we're running into is because of how climate change is affecting their habits, they're leaving later. And one of the things with their migratory route is it traditionally led them over the Alps. With leaving later, it means that the Alps are colder. So this has meant that when they are teaching these birds their new migratory route, they're actually teaching them a new route that is a longer route than it would have been traditionally, and even different than when they were initially starting to do this in the early 2000s. The route is approximately another 186 miles longer than even last year's route. And so if you've ever seen the movie Fly Away Home, where you're looking at Canadian geese and being able to use that to teach them their migratory route, or even as we've talked about in years past, sandhill cranes and a lot of crane populations using some type of ultralight flying machine to be able to fly with the birds, to teach them to have their foster parent on this tiny aircraft and giving them encouragement, recognizing them, and being able to teach them this route. It's something that is so important, is allowing these birds to be able to start coming back, start being able to do these migratory routes. And I think it's something that it's pretty amazing to think about. Heck, there was even a story that came out last year. For the first time in 400 years, there was a breeding pair that were able to actually breed in Switzerland. And they chose a Harley-Davidson windowsill to be that spot. It was perfect for them to have their nest. That's one of the things that's different, is in this time, this 300, 400 years where these ibises have been gone from Europe, we're having that the cliffs and places where they were traditionally nesting have changed quite a bit. These mountainsides have changed. So it means there is some more things that we have to be thinking about, considering both ways. the birds recognizing it and learning their new environment, learning it's different than the last time they were there, not that they even know what it was like previously, but also, more and probably more importantly, us as humans recognizing that this is going to be an evolving and changing thing for us to be able to look at that. Especially as the goal for this population to be of European birds by 2028 to be around 350. This is still going to take quite a bit of time, as we are around more what I was seeing 36 at this current time. At least the ones that they were doing and teaching the new route this year was around 36. So how does this all relate and tie into the gospel text that we have this week? I think it really ties well from the aspect of it would be easy for us to say, okay, you have an endangered species of bird. It's already going to be difficult for us to work with this. We've talked about in years past that beautiful animals do much better with the endangered species list than non-traditionally beautiful animals. And let's be honest, a bald-headed ibis is not the most beautiful bird, especially that it's black. It's just not the most beautiful bird on the face of the planet. And it's also been gone from one of their traditional areas for 300 to 400 years. Are we really going to be able to bring it back to these traditional grounds? There's been so much that has changed. Is it really worth the time, the effort to do this? And I think this is a moment where faith can be shown. Looking at the human nature for us to say, why not? Why can't we try doing this? Why can't we take some of the breeding population out of zoos and be able to teach them these migratory routes and be able to move them forward and reestablish some of these routes? Why not before it's too late, where there literally is none left or not enough to be able to really do something? Why wouldn't we? When we look at the woman who has a daughter that is possessed by a demon, who is of Syrophoenician origin, she's looked as an outcast. Why would we care? Why does Scripture take the time to even care about this woman? How about this deaf man with a speech impediment? Yet again, probably someone who has been overlooked by society greatly. Who cares? But in both cases, Jesus is taking the time to spend time with them, to have conversations with them, taking them aside, potentially, to work with them, to talk with them, to be able to understand their heart, and to recognize in a different way that they are loved. This, to me, reiterates the James text to a T, that this is something that is active and moving. It is not just something that is written down on a page of paper. This is a real living and breathing type of faith. This is not something that is just the law. We look at that coming from Isaiah, that this is something that in doing this, that we should be talking with the Lord and recognizing that the Lord is the provider for this. The Lord is the one who is going to bring forth this life that we are seeking and that we are desiring. Recognizing that the gifts that we are being given coming from Proverbs, that the Lord has made these amazing gifts and blesses us with these amazing gifts, that we would be recognizing that and also acknowledging that this is something that we need to continue to lean into, and thus leads us into like Psalm 125 and 146, recognizing that this is a hope that we have in the Lord and is our help and is our trust. These birds are trusting their foster parents, that they're not going to lead them astray, that they are going to teach them the route in order for not only them to be successful, but for their kids and their grandkids and their great-grandkids and their great-great-great-grandkids, because this is going to be the new traditional route for these birds, as long as they are able to be successful, because they will continue to pass this along for generation and generation and generation. We as people recognize that we had these birds disappear partially due to hunting, partially due to we don't really fully know, but we can also recognize that this is something that then we need to put forth the work and the effort into. And we also need to recognize that this is going to mean change for us as well. Just because we are helping and encouraging this also means that we need to be able to evolve and change as well, just like the birds are evolving and changing to be able to bring this back into their repertoire. be able to bring this new wild population into the genetic pool of the Northern Bald Ibis. We need to be able to continue to evolve and change as well. Just because culture has changed and we expect then the birds are just going to adapt and change, we have to be willing to adapt and change to them as well. That's part of the wisdom that we should be seeking. That's part of the healing and recognizing that things have gone astray and maybe we can make a change to help the environment, but that also means we need to be able to make a change as well. We see that with the turkey population where they have taken their small amount that are around the area of Turkey and have tried to build some artificial houses in the cliffs just south of the one town that they're in to kind of bring a new population and a bigger population back by providing more habitation. I think this is a question that we need to think about and reflect on. And I think it's going to be this week's question, which is, where do we need to continue to evolve and change for the healing of everybody? Where do we need to continue to evolve and change for the healing of everybody? Bringing back this ibis is going to hopefully provide healing for the environment. It also means that we need to be willing and able to go through healing as well, because we didn't know what we were missing. We didn't recognize and haven't been able to experience what the world is like in these European countries having the Northern Bald Ibis as part of it. And it's not necessarily going to be a quick and easy, this is what it is. It's going to take a tremendous amount of time for us to recognize the impact of what that means. I think that's the way we need to be looking at this. And again, as we are told to take care of this place, that is part of then our identity of who we need to be as people of God taking care of this place. We need to be active doers of the faith, not just speakers of the faith. We need to be willing to put ourselves out there. We need to be willing to go and do things that don't seem like it's really going to happen. We need to be willing and able to change and evolve and not just say, well, that hasn't been around for 50, 60 years, so we can't do it that way. But it also means that we can't go with the status quo. We need to be willing and able to try new things, maybe bring back things that have been gone for an extended period of time. We don't know what we have until it's gone. And sometimes when it's been gone so long, we don't know what we are missing out on. Sometimes then what we need to do is we do need to go and pray and talk and spend time with the Lord, recognizing that in that time, hopefully we get that insight, the energy, the drive to be able to help with some of these things, but recognize that we need to be willing and able to change along the way as well. Just like they are changing the migratory route this year to be able to help them be more successful instead of flying over the Alps because of how climate change is affecting their migratory route. Let's change it. Yes, it's longer, but hopefully it makes it so that they're able to be more successful. I think this is a text that challenges us to keep going and being an active presence within our faith, but not get hung up on things being different. I think the woman was just happy to have her daughter back. I think the man was just excited to be able to communicate well. And even when Jesus tells them not to share what they've been saying, they do. We have it right here. But I think there's also the aspect of us recognizing that there is celebration as well. I hope that we are able to have the Northern Bald Ibis come back into Europe and be this story of coming back from the brink, like we have seen somewhat with things like the whooping crane starting to make those moments of moving forward, because this is something that does need to be worked on, and we need to be able to acknowledge and see the impact that we're having and changing things around us, and recognizing in that the healing also means that healing changes us as well. As we evolve and recognize that things that we did that have hurt things in the past means that sometimes that we need to be able to sacrifice time, resources, money to be able to do the right thing and at least try. Because in that trying, I do think we start seeing the gift of what God has done for us initially. And hopefully in that, then we start to really realize that ahead of time so that we don't do that. And while doing that, we start recognizing that our faith becomes more active because it becomes something of helping and caring and looking out around us, whether it be through the history books or things that we're just observing, things that maybe aren't there that used to be, or people who are needing that help, needing that care. I think these are things that as a world we need to continue to work on, and as a faith tradition, for sure, we need to be working on. So I give props to the whole teams of people who are working with the Northern Ibis. And I pray that as a church and as a world, as Christians, that we continue to figure out ways that we make it active and moving around us so that we can see and make changes and correct mistakes we have made maybe even generations ago. So, we'll wrap this up as we always do. I pray God blesses you through your faith and amazes you through science.